Hello, my name is Simon Double and welcome to Inside the Rails, a monthly podcast for horse racing enthusiasts everywhere. And as ever, I'm joined by my co-host, Phil Boyle from BG Racing, fresh from the Cheltenham Festival. Fresh or jaded, Phil?
Hi, Simon. Yeah, still a bit jaded, to be honest. For the listeners' benefit, I should say we are recording this the week after the Cheltenham Festival, and whilst it's my favourite week of the year, it's a full-on week of form study, bets and trips to and from the races. So lots of late nights, lots of early mornings. And yes, it always takes me a while to recover.
Well, it was certainly a great festival, wasn't it? And of course, we'll discuss that later. But I'm delighted, lucky listeners, we have two guests in the interview today, a father and son act, Laurie and Philip Brannan, who've been racecourse presenters between them for many decades.
Indeed, and I think we both met them at the same event 12 months apart. I've seen Philip at the races several times since, but I first met Philip and Laurie at the HWPA Awards lunch in 2021, and I think you shared a table with them at the 2022 event.
I did indeed, Phil. That lunch is proving rather lucrative in supplying guests for Inside the Rails, as that's where I nabbed Richie Passad, who was our guest 2 episodes ago, and that's where I first met Laurie Brannan. I did know Philip a little bit previously from days at Newbury races. Now, you started off Cheltenham Week with the BG racing horse, Sajwan, running at Wolverhampton on Monday evening. You don't make things easy for yourself, do you, Mr. B?
I certainly don't. Yeah, having said that the Cheltenham Festival is a full-on week for me, I made it even fuller honour, if that's a thing, by adding a Monday night trip up to Wolverhampton. That was inevitably followed by a late night sending out photos, videos, email updates, etc. to all of the Sajwan shareholders. Being in a syndicate's all about feeling that you own the horse, and I know that, like me, Simon, you also take great pride in making sure that the people that could not be at the racecourse still get to really be part of the experience. But ultimately it was a bit of a disappointing experience for us. We thought the track at Wolverhampton would suit Sajwan better. It is a course that seems to help front runners a little bit more than Lingfield, where he's had his last 2 starts. But you'll be aware that the best thing for a front runner is to be left alone up front, and probably the worst thing is for them to be challenged for the lead. So the fact that Sajwan had to see off 4 different challenges from horses that were trying to get to the front to get across to the inside rail was not going to ever be a good thing. He had the speed to hold his position, but as William Carson said later, the jockey, he was flat out for the first 2/3 of the race and just couldn't keep that pace all the way to the line. Yeah, he lost the lead at the furlong pole, he lost 3rd at the half furlong, and he lost 4th in the final stride, so finished 5th.
Very frustrating for the likes of you and me who backed him first 4, I guess.
Yes.
Look, that's interesting you mentioned front-running tactics, because quite a few winners at the Cheltenham Festival were front-runners, or at least very prominent throughout. But, as you've sort of alluded to, there's a danger that horses can cut each other's throats when taking each other on, as they sadly did in Sajwan's race.
Yeah, I mean, that's spot on. And it is a risk you have to accept if you have a horse that likes to be in front. The race is not always going to go in your favour. We're now waiting to see what handicap mark Sajwan's going to be allotted, and we'll have to make a new plan from there. Anyhow, I'm making a big fuss about the timing of my trip to Wolverhampton, but at least travelling there and back was pretty uneventful for me. I know you went to Newcastle with a runner, and for a while there I thought you were going to be stuck up there for a few days.
Yes. We were trying Dancing in the Woods over a mile for the first time at a track we thought would suit, and we had the great Joe Fanning booked, the jockey Joe having given him a peach of a ride 2 years ago at Newmarket. Now, Newcastle is a long way to go, but when we entered the horse, I didn't know the UK was going to be hit by snow and a blizzard. Driving conditions were tricky to say the least. I took 2 owners up there from Hertfordshire. We had to stop off at a service station to check that even though it was an all-weather meeting, the actual race meeting was still going ahead. Anyway, we did get there in plenty of time, checked into the hotel. The meeting went ahead with virtually one man and his dog there. I've never seen a racecourse so empty, and that includes during the pandemic. Suffice to say, Phil, Woody ran a nothing sort of race. He beat 2 home, And as I half suspected, he's ready for a holiday, and that's where he is right now.
So, I probably better apologise to our listeners for your attempt at the Geordie accent. We've probably just alienated most of the North East, but don't give up the day job. It does sound like you and a couple of your shareholders might have given the crowd numbers a bit of a boost there. I'm pleased you did make it home safely. What about the other Solario horses?
Listen, you've got to retain a sense of humour in these times, haven't you? Actually, the journey home on Friday, I mentioned we stopped over, was fantastic. I've never known the A1 so quiet. As for the Solario horses, Woody, as I said, is having some time away from it all, enjoying being turned out at Martley Hall Stud, where Sharp Distinction had his break, and it did him the power of good. He's back in training and looks well. Tarantino is in full work and will be our earliest runner when the turf season starts this month. And the 2-year-old colt by Alwick Hare, having had a mini break, is back with Amy. And I'm going up to Newmarket in a few days' time to see most of the horses.
Great. That all sounds good. But, don't forget we've still got the Grand National and the Punchestown Festival to come over jump. So,
True.
Don't get fully into flat racing mode just yet.
So, Phil, come on. How was the Cheltenham Festival for you?
It was brilliant as always. From a betting perspective, it might have been best if I'd stayed in bed on Friday. Financially, the week was going very well until then. But as much as I enjoyed watching the Friday action, the wheels came off the betting wagon on that day, and I managed to turn a very successful week into a slightly losing one.
I know how you feel. I was doing okay as well until the Friday, which is always a difficult day, I feel. Of course, it's not all about betting. These festivals are about atmosphere, heartwarming stories, David versus Goliath. In other words, the small syndicates versus the big owner battalions, the small trainers against the big trainers. For me, Constitution Hill bolting up in the champion hurdle, Honeysuckle confounding some of her purest critics by winning the mare's hurdle, and the absolutely supreme ride given by Paul Townend in the Gold Cup on Galopin des Champs. They were 3 major highlights for me.
Yeah, I have to agree. And yes, Tuesday was a brilliant day to be there. Constitution Hill really lived up to the hype. And despite having a decent bet on Love Envoi, who led over the last and looks set to give us a syndicate winner to talk about on the podcast, you couldn't fail to cheer on Honeysuckle as she swept to the front in that race. It was a brilliant sign-off to her career and a really special moment for trainer Henry de Bromhead, who's had such a terrible year.
Yes.
Listeners will probably be aware that Henry's son Jack very sadly lost his life in a pony racing accident last year. Nothing will remove that sense of loss, but everyone in racing was delighted to see some good news for the family.
You're so right, Phil. There surely wasn't a dry eye on the track when Rachel Blackmore put Honeysuckle and Henry de Bromhead back in the limelight. There was a lot of warmth around the place, it seemed to me, watching from my armchair at home. And that for me was highlighted by people like presenter Alice Plunkett, showing and expressing raw emotion with the de Bromheads and other winning connections throughout the week. It was genuine and very nice to see.
Yeah, and the atmosphere is always brilliant on the course. The crowd is a very fair and appreciative one. I must admit it did seem extra special on Tuesday, though. Yeah, on the track, David Pipe alluded to last month, there's a real domination of Irish-trained runners in recent years, but it wasn't all one-way traffic. It was great to see winners shared around, both in terms of the trainers and the jockeys. People like Harry Cobden have ridden numerous winners, stable jockey to Paul Nicholls, but his delight when he won on Stage Star and then again on Stay Away Faye was great to see. Cheltenham wins really matter, and the emotion that it generates is always very special.
Yes, and what a great achievement for the owners group, winning with Stage Star on Thursday. Now, that was a good front-running ride by Harry Cobden, whose rival jockeys gave him too much rope, I thought. I thought he slightly rode them to sleep. Any other performances or rides of note for you, Phil?
Yes, I thought Corach Rambler winning the Ultima for the second year running was a good achievement. It was another great ride from Derek Fox to produce him late to snatch the win. I also thought the Real Whacker in the Brown Advisory was great to watch. I know there was a lot of talk of him running in the Gold Cup as a novice, but Jerry Colomb, the favourite from Ireland, was clearly well fancied and is probably very good. So beating him with another brilliant front-running performance was very impressive. And Yeah, that's another front-running winner. Maybe they all won that week except Sajwan. I also want to mention the cross-country race. I used to think it was a really bad race, but it seems to be contested by a much better class of horse in recent years, and Delta Work and Galvin treated us to a great finish this year. And a quick quiz question for you that came out of the festival. What do you think links the following people?
Oh, dear.
Dara O'Keefe, Mr. J. Gleeson, Liam McKenna, Ben Harvey, Mr. P. King, and Mr. Bradley Gibbs, and Aidan Kelly.
Oh dear, this is taking me back to my old 15-1 days as a question writer. Well, let's have a look. Aidan Kelly trained the winner, I think, of the Martin Pipe Conditional. I think Mr. Gleeson is one of the Gleesons is in the betting ring as his son. Is it something to do with that? I don't know, conditional jockeys or I don't know. Yeah, go on, put me out my misery.
They all won a race at the Cheltenham Festival, jockeys primarily, and not names that would be household names. And when we hear about how much a winner at Cheltenham, even to the top names in the sport, actually means, all of those guys had a winner at Cheltenham, and it'll probably be, a day that they'll remember for the rest of their lives. So it's not just the big names at the Cheltenham Festival.
Well. What a great question, Mr. B. Well done, you. Well done. Now, any horses to take out of the festival for our listeners?
I'll probably watch a few races back again in the coming days, but one that comes to mind, because I watched it at the time, thanks to having had a bet on the horse, is Nicky Henderson's Walking on Air. He was 5th in the Pertemps handicap hurdle. He was short of room on the home turn, made some great headway approaching the last. I was pretty confident that he was going to win, but just after the last, the gap in front of him closed. His run was just checked for a couple of strides, and I think that was absolutely crucial because he lost a lot of momentum, and Nico de Boinville switched him out to the right, and he just couldn't get going again before they reached the line. I think he might have won or gone very close with a clear run, so he'd be one I'd be following in the future.
I agree with you there, Phil. Yes, he was a horse I backed as well, and I think there's a big race in him. He was mentioned in some of the Cheltenham previews. I also thought Thomas Moore, the David Pipe runner, gave us a run for our money at 66-1, wins 6th in the Albert Bartlett on ground that wouldn't have been ideal. Now, just before our guests come on air, we should mention a syndicate day at Warwick in late February that we helped to organise and both attended. 4,500 people were there, largely due to people paying just a £5 to get in. One of our previous guests, Mike Catamol, would be pleased about that because he was banging on about cheaper entrance fees. That was something he advocated on Inside the Rails.
I really enjoyed the day. And it was great to see shared ownership celebrated like that. As you say, the £5 admission must have really helped. There was a huge crowd. It included lots of children on half term, which was great to see. And there was plenty of interest in the various syndicates who were present at the meeting. As you know, the Racehorse Syndicates Association put up a bonus to be presented to any Racehorse Syndicates Association member with a winner on the day. And I got to go and tell the members of the Potwell Racing Syndicate that they'd won that bonus. As you might imagine, they were absolutely thrilled with that. And positive day all round. In fact, the only downside to the whole day was seeing one poor syndicate manager suffering when his gazebo caught a couple of gusts of wind and took it off its moorings. And whilst we helped him rescue it the first time, the second mishap looked like it might have caused some terminal damage to that particular structure.
Well, thank you and the other RSA colleagues for your help. Suffice to say, I don't think I'll be taking my gazebo to Nottingham in July when we have the next syndicate day. Anyway, I'm delighted to say, Phil, we've got our guests on the line, not one but two, Laurie and Philip Brannan. Hi, guys. How are you?
Good morning. Hello. No, it's great to be here.
This is a bit of a first for Inside the Rails, a double header. We've never had two people being interviewed, so fingers crossed, I'm sure it's going to go really well. But we met at the HWPA Awards, didn't we, last December, when I sort of nabbed you, I think it was, Laurie, and said, would you come on Inside the Rails? So obviously nabbing you worked.
I only agreed probably then because I had too much to drink.
Well, I'm not worried about the tactics. It obviously worked, so it was great.
Yeah.
Anyway, firstly, gentlemen, we've just had the Cheltenham Festival. Did you go? Laurie, first of all, you, and was it profitable? What were your highlights?
Well, no, I didn't go. I had to attend every day of the meeting when I was with the Racecourse Association. And so every aspect of the festival during the 20 or so years I was required to be there. This year, though, I watched it, all the drama unfold on television. And even remotely, you could sense the atmosphere of what is still, for me, one of racing's most rewarding experiences. It's always a difficult place to find winners, particularly in the handicaps, with everything trained to the minute. But I'm pleased to say that I finished slightly ahead at the end of the 4 days, having backed Langadam to win the Coal Cup.
And you, Philip, I know you didn't go to Cheltenham either, but did you enjoy it, and what were your highlights?
I did enjoy it thoroughly. I didn't go. Like Laurie, there were many years when I had to be there when we managed the sponsorship for Bonus Print back in the day, and they used to sponsor at the festival, and that was always great. One of the things that I've learned over the years, though, is I'm not very good at being on a racecourse if I haven't got a job to do. I get far too distracted watching other people doing theirs. And with something like the Cheltenham Festival, obviously there is a little bit of guilt attached in not going because, as ever, again this year, it produced so many of those I was there moments. But then
yes,
I'm fortunate enough to have a job where I'm privileged to be involved in so many of those throughout the racing year. And so I can still enjoy watching it from a distance. But as well as watching the actual races on ITV, I followed a lot of it this year on BBC Radio 5 Sports Extra. And I thought their coverage this year was outstanding. And the standout for me was an absolute revelation because I hadn't heard him before, was Charlie Post, the ex-jockey, working in the commentary box alongside John Hunt, who obviously is one of the most respected broadcasters in racing. But I thought Charlie was absolutely brilliant. The guy's a natural broadcaster, and the insight he gave into some of those outstanding riding performances at the festival, that was the big winner for me.
Okay, well, that's somebody to listen out for. Now, Philip, I know you have several racing hats. You're MD of Sports Guide. Many people know you as the voice and indeed the face of Newbury Racecourse. But it was your father, Laurie, who really gave birth to the role of a race day presenter. So come on, Laurie, tell us how it all began.
Well, I joined the Racing Information Bureau in the early 1960s as Midland Area Public Relations Officer with the responsibility of promoting 23 racecourses. I clocked up in those days 40,000 plus miles a year, which didn't mean I had much of a family life. And Philip will tell you, I was never there on his birthday, and he's never stopped reminding me of that fact.
Oh, dear.
In those days, public relations were new to racing and racecourses. But I got into the habit of writing a short welcome announcement to Racecourse to be broadcast over the public address system, and a closing message advising those leaving of the date of the next meeting. Racing was reluctant to change. These had to be cleared and checked, first of all, by the clerk of the scales. Later on, I began to add details of potential traffic hold-ups, train times, and the closure of bar and restaurant facilities. And while this all might sound a bit mundane now, believe me, it was groundbreaking then. The public address system was for use, I was told, only for runners and riders and the race result.
Is that right?
Yeah, we had the occasional cup race, the trophy for which was given to the winning owner, usually without any formal presentation. And I decided to change that. And one day at Leicester Racecourse, I scripted up a suitable announcement for the Racecourse Technical Services broadcaster to deliver. The Racecourse management, however, weren't pleased with me when they got an additional fee from RTS for using their man. Any such future announcements, I was told, would have to be made by myself. So I picked up the microphone and began to engage with the racecourse on a daily basis, adding a nugget or two of information and hopefully a little bit of colour to enhance the race day experience. It wasn't long before every racecourse had a front of house man. some of whom I am happy to say came and worked with me before setting out on their own.
Okay, what a lovely story. And which courses, Laurie, did you work at particularly, and were there any particular memories that you remember fondly?
Oh, well, the brief one, I had 23 courses. The furthest east would be Great Yarmouth and west would be Cheltenham. North, I went as far as Doncaster because the PR man up at doing the north didn't care for working with Doncaster. It was a council-owned course in those days. And the furthest south was the now defunct Alexandra Park. And everything in between. And yes, I have a lot of fond memories, some of which I could share with you. Public relations were new to racecourses in the 60s and 70s, and we could be as innovative as we wished. Like the time I was contacted by a zoo local to Nottingham with an orphan baby elephant. I wasted no time in arranging for it to be brought to the racecourse and running a competition among racegoers to give it a name. I wasn't aware beforehand, though, that horses, particularly 2-year-olds, have an aversion to the smell of elephants. But luckily, we got away with it. I'd like to take some satisfaction from having staged the first ever pop concert on a racecourse, with the booking in the early 1970s of Sight and Sound, a group local to Wolverhampton, who played a 45-minute set between races on a stage we erected in the parade ring at the course's Easter Monday meeting. It's a money spinner, and that has been copied hundreds of times since.
That's really interesting, Laurie, because do you know what? Mistakenly, I thought the first music was probably the Newmarket Nights on Friday evenings. So there you go. I'm corrected.
Well, yes, you are corrected, but it was from that I was working with Nick Lees at Newmarket when we'd extend this idea, and the first booking we made was the American singer, songwriter, bass guitarist Susie Quattro.
Oh yes, remember her.
And that was the first one we staged at Newmarket.
Fascinating stuff. Well done you. 2 major innovations.
Thank you.
Well done you, Laurie.
And if I can turn to you, Philip, we thought we'd keep the Philips together with me asking the questions for you to answer. How did you get into racecourse presenting? Was that inevitable with your dad's job, or was it something that you did sort of independently? What's your story?
I can't even think about that now because I'm still reeling from what I've just heard. Who was it that first discovered that horses didn't like the smell of elephants? And how? Where did that happen? No, I kind of fell into it after Laurie had left the industry and set up Sports Guide with the former ITV first time around and Channel 4 broadcaster Graham Good. He'd asked me on a number of occasions to join them in the business, and I was reluctant at that time, partly because I was forging a career in an entirely unrelated industry, and it also felt a little bit like the easy option. I had all the young person's hang-ups about going in as the boss's son and all that sort of thing. And then I was approached by a recruitment company in the industry that I was working in to go for a job interview. It went very well, and I thought I could get that job if I wanted. And so that was when I rang Laurie and said, can I come and have a chat? Because I thought I'd be able to give it 6 months. And having established that I did have a value elsewhere, I could go back to that industry if it didn't work out. And that would have been in November 89. I think, and I wasn't particularly interested in the racing side of it at that time. And as Laurie alluded to, early memories were that he'd normally be at the Newmarket July meeting for my birthday. So racing had been around me, but it was just Dad's job in those early days. But I was interested in the business side of it, and so when I joined, that was what I concentrated on, understanding how racing worked, how it was funded. But going round with Laurie, gradually was introduced into the race day presenting role. And as I say, in the early days, when I called him up and said, I think I'm ready to have that conversation now, he said, well, you better come in and have a chat with us. And I made an appointment and went to see him and Graham, and we sat in Laurie's office. And I sat down, and I hadn't really prepared for an interview. And the first thing he said to me was, so, tell me a little bit about yourself. which I thought, coming from you, was slightly odd. But it does show how much of my childhood he missed out on. In all seriousness, he had very little idea at that time of what I'd been doing work-wise and some of the transferable skills that I might be able to bring to the business.
Well, tell us a little bit about that. I mean, you're the MD of Sports Guide now. What is Sports Guide? What do you do?
What we do now is not necessarily what we did then. When Laurie left the industry and established Sports Guide, and I heard Laurie mention that there were 23 racecourses on his patch. When he established the business on his own with Graham, 13 of those racecourses that he had worked with said that they would employ him on a freelance basis, and that formed the basis of the business, working for those 13 racecourses, which included attending each of their race days. So you're looking at, I think, at the height it was somewhere in the region of 156 race days annually. So, that takes you out of the office a lot. And that was providing support to those courses was the basis of the business. Over the years, that landscape has changed, and racecourses now have their own internal teams. It was before the consolidation of the big race course groups, and so now they have their own internal PR and marketing. That landscape has changed, and the business has changed, but our business has had to change alongside that. So these days we focus mainly on sponsorship and event management, strategic PR and marketing for industry clients. And I've been fortunate to forge close links with the UAE over the years. And so we've got a good number of clients based in that part of the world. And also with the international Arabian racing community, working with them, and in particular with the Sheikh Mansour Festival. That's taken me racing in at least a dozen different countries, from France to Poland, Morocco, Spain, Romania, which has been fascinating.
That's fascinating stuff, Philip. And gentlemen, it's been really lovely listening to how things have evolved. I'd love to go on talking all day, but we've got one final question that we must come to, which we like to ask all of our guests. So I'll come to you first, Laurie. If there were three things, and only three things, please, that you could change for the better in British racing, what would they be?
Yes, I've got to be bonneted about this. The first thing I would do is reduce the fixture list. When I joined the Racecourse Association in the early 60s, there were 840 days racing. Today, there are almost 1,500. Wow. With the result that racing is no longer the special occasion it used to be. There isn't, obviously, enough prize money to go around, spread too thinly. And all we've done is create mediocrity. And outside of the festival meetings, many racecourses struggle to attract attendances and have to rely on media rights to cover costs. I think we possibly need to restructure the industry, perhaps look at the Australian model, where the return from betting enables them to put up prize money in excess of 20,000 for a small maiden race at a country track. We can't compete with that. So the expanding fixture list is a problem. A decline in the horse population is another problem we need to address. The increase in training fees and the small fields which we're experiencing, which do not allow each-way betting, which means that revenue from that side of the business is not good enough.
Yeah, you're not the first person to mention that on Inside the Rails. And Philip, can I ask the same question to you, please? 3 things to change for the better of British racing.
The weather at Newbury on Shallow Hurdle Day. If I could have changed that, I would have done. Oh, that was miserable. Seriously, I think one of the things that Laurie touched on was attendances. Attendances need to grow, and I know there's a focus within the industry at the moment about diversity and inclusion, but I think there are some more basic barriers to entry that can be addressed, like the cost of a day at the races. And I don't place the responsibility for that solely at the door of the racecourses. I understand their model and why they need to charge the admission prices that they do, but some form of industry subsidy that would allow racecourses to nominate certain race days when they could slash admission prices or even scrap them altogether to get people in to introduce them to the sport. I think we can look at the Jockey Club with their recent change in policy about dress code. Not entirely sure that that's necessarily going to tick too many boxes. I think the cost of going racing needs to be looked at. Secondly, engagement. Once they're there, work on increasing the conversion rate from racegoers to participants. And there are some really good initiatives. Racing to School is brilliant. I've had the pleasure of working with them in the past. That's a great way to show young people that there are future careers in racing. And also ways to encourage racehorse ownership. And again, the ownership events that GBR ran last season were great. Now, I know you two were both involved in them, so you'd know more about the success of them than me. And I would like to see more initiatives like that to engage people with the racing experience. Trips to the sales, you get people to the sales to see where it all starts off. And I see racecourses doing things like trips to the start or trips to a jump, which are terrific in terms of providing an insight that might just hook somebody into thinking, yeah, this is about more than the betting and just watching the horses on the track. I'd like to see more initiatives like that.
Gentlemen, fascinating stuff. I'd love to talk all day, but we've really enjoyed having you on. Thank you so much for your time. And Phil and I look forward to seeing you at the racecourse later on in the year, hopefully.
See you on course.
Well, that was fascinating stuff, wasn't it, Phil? And I think our first doubleheader went quite well. And who'd have thought or who knew that 2-year-old horses don't like the smell of elephants?
Absolutely. The listeners may not pick it up from the edit, but it was nice that Laurie and Philip banter about the same way that we do when they're not on the air. Before we go, I better sign off with my usual plea. Up until now, we've funded this podcast ourselves as we love shared ownership. We want to attract and help as many people as possible to get involved. And the best way that we can do this is to attract new listeners to the podcast. And that only happens when our existing listeners help us to spread the word. So, yes, if you're listening to this now, please help us to make Inside the Rails bigger and better by following the podcast on your chosen podcast platform, by telling your racing friends about us. And if you can engage with us on Twitter, we're at Inside the Rails there. If you can like and retweet our stuff, that all helps. And as always, if you or someone you know needs some support or guidance on joining a syndicate, do feel free to get in touch. We will always be happy to help.
Well, that just leaves me to thank co-host Phil Boyle from BG Racing, our very special guests Laurie and Philip Brannan, producer Callum Ronan from Callum Ronan Creative, and of course, you the listeners. Another truly memorable Cheltenham has come and gone. The clocks have sprung forward. But where is spring? So I'm off to Tenerife. This is Simon Double from Solaria Racing saying, thank you for listening to Inside the Rails, and until next time, hasta luego.